let's just start with some quick introductions. Let's start with you, John. Tell us about Braze and tell us about the engineering team.
Hey everyone, my name is John Hyman. I'm one of the co-founders and the CTO at Braze. What Braze is we're a comprehensive customer lifecycle engagement platform. Essentially, we help consumer brands use data to deliver really great personalized messaging experiences. So we help deliver personalized emails, push notifications, in-app messages, text messages, and more. So chances are we're probably already in your pocket. Like if I send you money on Venmo, you try to withdraw it and get an in-app message, it says, why don't you put this on a Venmo debit card? That's served to you through Braze. Or if you get an email from Seamless about restaurants you should order in from tonight, that's sent to you from Braze. Or if you're playing Pokemon Go and you get a push notification about some new event near you, that's also sent to you by Braze. So we have about 500 employees globally. The engineering organization is about 70 when you include our product organization as well. We're like a little bit under 100 folks. Our whole product and engineering team is headquartered here in New York City. We're actually just down the street at 34th and 8th. And looking forward to speaking with you all. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Chandana.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chandana, and I work as a tech recruiting manager at Latch. Latch is a smart access system that we sell B2B only. So some of you may have seen it out in the wild on the high rises or the really large residential buildings that you'll see all over the cities. And people always ask me, what's the difference between Latch and Ring or August or any other smart lock? And Latch was really designed to touch all the different pieces of the multifamily home. So if you think about the tenant, the property manager, and anyone trying to access your unit when you're not there. So that could be friends, family, house cleaners. That could even be third parties like UPS, Jet.com, and Nido through Airbnb that we are all partners with. You can interact with all these companies and partnerships now securely through Latch. So we are also headquartered here right in Hudson Yards. We're about a little over 230 people, about 200 in our New York office, and a small but growing office in San Francisco. So excited to be a part of this.
And you run technical recruiting, and tell us about how big is the team?
Yeah, so our tech recruiting team right now is just myself and my colleague who's actually here. And the recruiting organization as a whole is about 4 recruiters. We have a coordinator, our VP of people, 2 HR reps, and a recruiting ops specialist.
How many people are on the tech team at the company?
Right now we have about 70 engineers total. So that's hardware, software, firmware, and about 35 specifically on software.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yo, Tom.
This one.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Yotam. I'm VP of Engineering for Electric as of 3 months ago. What we do in one sentence is IT as a service, but I'll break it down to 2 things. One, we have a platform that provides 360 visibility into a company's IT, their devices, what software is running on them, what policies are applied, and so on. And then also all the SaaS accounts that a company might use, the licenses, and so on. Network configuration, everything else that's IT, all in one place, fully visible. And then the other side of our product is service. And so we would chat with employees within a customer's company on the fly through Slack, whatever it is that they need. They can't connect to the Wi-Fi, or they can't print something, or they need a new account on Jira, or they need a new device, whatever it is, we do it through Slack. We provide service within 10 minutes or less. That's about it. Team size, engineering, about 30. We should get to 50 by the end of the year. Company as a whole is about 170. And our engineering is split New York and Argentina.
And by way of background, Tom worked for quite a while at Work Market. They are frequent speakers on our panels. So,
right, yeah, Jeff Wald, I assume, founder of Work Market. Yeah, I was at Work Market for about 3 years as a senior director. January 2018, we were acquired by ADP, so an ADP company now. And before that, I was VP engineering for Structure Web, a small startup in the channel marketing automation.
My name is Adam Marcus. I'm the co-founder and CTO of B12. B12 is largely based in New York, and our focus is on helping small and medium-sized businesses establish their web presence. So what that means is if you're a small business, you're looking to set up your website, you go to b12.io, you tell us the name of your business, where you're located, and what kind of business you are. And in seconds, our algorithms will find your old website, find you on social media, classify a bunch of content about you, and show you a beautiful personalized website with all of your content in it. And from there, we've built out some technology called Orchestra that we've open sourced that allows us to really quickly, in a matter of minutes, assemble a flash team of experts. So folks like designers, copywriters, customer success team members who can get your website launched in a matter of days. And at that point, it's a living and breathing experience. So we have similar human machine powered solutions for things like search engine optimization, blogging, and email marketing. And so that's kind of the product experience for our customers. In terms of the company, there are 55 of us. On the product team, there are 25 team members, and we have 18 engineers. And we're about 80% of the company is in New York. We have an office in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, where our first engineer, Kainar, set up an office. And then we have a few team members distributed all over the world from there.
Lots of things you just mentioned I want to go into. And actually, let's start, because I'd love to hear from you and John specifically about setting up your teams when it was basically just you on day one, what happened on day two or month two. Can we just start with a question of, you said your product team, of which 18 are engineers. So when you started hiring, what was your view on what roles to hire for and how to, I guess, practically and philosophically position product? Let's start with you, since I think you were mentioning the breakdown.
Yeah, sure. So when kind of before we started the company, I just wanted to know that there was something there. And so for a few good months, the founding team and I was the only engineer on the team at the time. We just kind of built out and prototyped this system orchestra that we were going to open source. And we kind of just proved to ourselves that this system could really quickly assemble amazing teams of experts and empower them with all sorts of automation along the way. Once we were convinced that there was a thing there, we then, on day one of the company or day zero of the company, the founding team was basically my co-founder and CEO, Nitesh, our director of design, Meredith, and our first engineer, Kainar, who I'd worked with at the last startup that I was at Aloku. And we kind of just kept it small for a few months. But within a few months, we had hired largely about 5 generalist engineers who we just had a lot of surface area to build out in the product.
And what were you looking for certain specialties or just anyone who was good at coding anything?
So one of the key differentiators of B12 is our specialization in humans and machines coming together, this notion of human-assisted AI. And so I have an academic background. The one area of specialization that we were hiring for was people with PhDs in the world of data, human-computer interaction, human-assisted artificial intelligence. In terms of the engineering team, initially we were looking for generalists, and that helped us really quickly establish the surface area. But about 5 engineers in, we started to realize we were saying we wanted generalists along the way, but a lot of us had a lot less experience with front-end engineering. And you could kind of see it in both the code base and the experience that we were building.
Yeah.
So we started to get more comfortable with hiring in specialty areas. So we kind of built out a good team of front-end engineers, and then at that point started specializing further into back-end engineers, data engineers, and folks like that.
John, tell us about the beginnings on your technical team.
So when we started the company, this was July of 2011. There were 3 co-founders, one who was non-technical, and then 2 of us who were technical. And what we were building is largely the product we have today. So we wanted to help brands essentially have a good human, strong relationship with their consumers. Mobile was exploding at the time, and we thought that this was going to be a really great new medium. And I was very comfortable in working on things in long calls, like the back end, infrastructure, servers, scaling. Bill, who's my co-founder and our CEO, is very well versed at kind of product. So we thought about, first off, let's just try to think about how we're even splitting our teams of us up in our responsibilities, and said, okay, we were choosing titles, for example. We said, why don't, Bill, we make you like a product focused CTO, and I will be like a back-end and scaling focused CIO. So I'm going to focus on scaling back-end, our servers and systems. Why don't you focus on kind of the product ideation and what our product will essentially become, and be that technical leader there. What was missing amongst our skill sets was mobile, because we were trying to really get into this mobile app publishers, like work with mobile app publishers. So we were like, that's what we got to hire for first off. So we, then try to think about, okay, well, how do we hire someone to do iOS development with us? And iOS was key at the time. In fact, we didn't even build an Android product at all until 2013. Because iOS was like really the only thing that was worth building on. And we thought about, okay, should we just contract this out? And we strongly decided against doing that, because as we're starting a new company, we were like, we want people who also have some sense of product, some sense of what this is, how this should shape up as a developer. What would you want to use? And we thought that contract programmers were too transactional. Like, they're not going to be thinking about your product after they put in their timesheet with you. They're not going to be like thinking about it over the weekend or whatnot. So we really wanted an employee. This was really hard to do because we had to convince people to either like quit their jobs and work for us. Like, I was 25 at the time, Bill was 23. We had to convince people that like we should be their bosses. Very hard to do. And essentially what we had to do for our first hire for iOS was get someone who was right out of university. And just kind of take someone who really had never had a job before and have them kind of like help us out.
I think what's standing out to me, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding things, but the kind of early stage platitude of hire people who are smart and can hustle applies as much to the technical side of things as it does to the non-technical side of things. I guess I would always think as a non-technical person, there's more nuance. There probably is. But yes.
Yeah, I think that's like mostly true in terms of the sense, like when we started the company, so we also then started hiring from like friends in our network. In fact, like the next 5 employees that we hired, 4 of them we knew. And we just kind of were able to kind of convince, they hated their jobs at Accenture. And we were like, why are you doing this? Like, you should come work at a startup. It's going to be great. You'll take, a third of your money, but it'll be better. But basically, like, one of the things that like we were just kind of like running into was, I was telling people, look, like when I was saying to my friends, like, I don't want to manage anyone. Like, just come on here and I want you to just be an owner and just kind of like build stuff and be a part of the product and just get things done. And that works well, I think, if like 3 conditions are met. 1 is that you're really small. 2 is that you know the person and you trust them. And 3, that they're good. Because as soon as you like have someone that you don't know, or someone is not performing well, I don't want to manage anyone, like totally breaks down. Like, they might not be spending the right time doing something. You might not actually catch the accountability that they're like falling behind, that they're not actually building what you want. You do have to stay on top of it. So you do want the general hustlers, but you can't, I would say I'd be cautious to take your eye off the ball of being like, I'm just going to get a generalist and expect that they're going to like be able to accomplish the goals I have set for them.
Chandana and Yotam, you in your experience, if I'm not mistaken, you come in at the later stage, slightly later in Yotam's experience, but you kind of have the perspective of the mistakes that were made before you got there. Can you kind of shed a little light on how early stage founders might be thinking about setting up and structuring their technical teams, given your kind of more sophisticated perspective on it?
Yeah, I think, specifically at Latch, there was a big emphasis on just get people in the door. Like, we just need people to code and build our product. And, I think I realized very quickly when I came in that there wasn't enough of an emphasis on senior talent. Mm-hmm. And I think that has a very quick, effect on the organization. And I think what's really important to understand when you're first building a team from scratch is that you need people that understand how to build and scale organizations. Mm-hmm. You need people that understand architecture and how to implement these systems properly. You need people that understand how to mentor when you're growing so quickly. I think that's probably the biggest thing I would say. That's
a great point. And so can you be even more specific there? Like for the scenarios that John and Adam were describing, what would you edit about kind of, I'm sure you guys have some edits too now. What would you edit about kind of the way they went about things at the beginning? At what point should they have hired someone more senior, prioritized other skills?
Probably at the very beginning. I think bringing in folks who had maybe worked at very large organizations that had operated off of a large large-scale distributed system that knows how to like implement these best engineering practices right away would have been really helpful.
Are those people also expensive?
Very.
You, Tom, I'd love to get your thoughts on this too.
Yeah, so a couple of things. There's one thing that's actually not different. When I joined Structure Web, I had one full-time, one part-time. Or now when I joined Electric and there were 25 people. One thing that's the same for me is don't plan those first hires in vacuum. You're not asking, okay, what do I need to build my platform? Because your company is not in vacuum. And so you have business goals. And so I always ask that question with the business goals in mind. And so if I want to hit this business goal, if I want to get to this place, what do I need? And then break that down and prioritize and see how you can, with the minimum resources that you probably have, get the closest you can to this particular goal so that your company can stay alive, and then you create new goals and break those down into resources.
Can you give us an example of a goal that, you felt connected to as an engineer early on?
As an engineer early on? Yeah, from a hiring standpoint, or do you mean more?
Well, you said business goals, so I'm basically just trying to crystallize the point even further for the audience.
Yeah, so I'm actually more thinking about it from the CTO perspective or from the head of functions perspective. You have to first understand what it is that your business is trying to do, right? Either in a 6 months seed money period or in a fiscal year for business that's a little more mature. Mm-hmm. First, figure it out. What is the business outcome you're looking for? And then translate that to what product do I need to build in this particular year to hit those goals? And then break down that product into an engineering plan, which you can then say, okay, if I need to execute on this plan, I need apparently 3 front-end engineers and only 2 back-end or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But align it this way so that you're not just guessing in vacuum. Oh, I think it would be really great to have an expert on DynamoDB. No, that doesn't work like that. You have to first figure out why you're building what you're building, what outcome you're looking for, and then resource from that, prioritize from that.
So to push back on, this wisdom, everything is changing. Like even at Latch, even at later stage companies, I know it's not very later stage, but in this room it might be on the later stage. Even things are fluctuating. Like the environment is fluid. In your first year, you barely know what your goals are. Or how can kind of founders, technical and non-technical, prioritize, foundations and structures on their team when everything else is so uncertain? Anyone? Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of different things to that. On the technical side, I would say you need strong technical leadership. And then on the non-technical side, I'd say strong product leadership, which is just ultimately building some kind of tech startup. These are very important. What I mean here is like if you are technical, you want to ensure that your foundation is going to like scale and be strong in the sense that you can, kind of make sure that you're doing things kind of the right way that you want to, essentially as you kind of add more complexity, that you're not going to have kind of scaling problems there. The foundation is like so important. The initial technologies you choose, so important. So like the database that we chose, the programming language that I chose back in 2011 now impacts like what we can do today because we have like tech debt. We've accumulated essentially what's referred to as debt of being able to move quickly because we can't use certain data structures, or we're using a programming language that it's optimized for speed, but it's really bad in terms of like performance. So we spend a lot more money than we ought to. So setting that tone from the beginning is really good. But for other folks who are in the business, they want to know that you have like a vision and just leadership. And so kind of defining your opinionated view of where the world is going to, I think, be the thing that gives people like the confidence to build what you want them to do, because your specs will likely be very, basic. Like you're not going to have like very detailed requirements. Probably you may not have like an incredible amount of customer research. You may not have UX, UI designers that tell you how things are going to look. So you need to kind of convey the vision and make sure that like you're not changing your vision day to day, because then that's going to frustrate, especially in the early stages. You won't get things done. People will be frustrated. So you have to kind of have that like view from the beginning, I'd say.
And staying one more moment, and Adam, maybe you can answer this on the foundations point. You both grew teams of engineers full-time on your team, and let's speak to the non-technical founders here who may or may not have a technical co-founder. How can they think about whether outsourcing is a good temporary solution or it is not? Any opinions from the panel on that?
Yeah, I think I haven't outsourced any of like the product team, so be it product managers, designers, engineers, but I can't speak from experience in saying don't do it or something like that. I think that there's certain qualities that we look for as we're building our team that you could probably also find in an outsourced setting. So specifically, the things that really matter when you're building your team are the longevity of experience that you're going to have with the members of your team. So whether that's someone that you've hired to work in the same office with you, that's someone that's distributed from you but officially working for your company, or someone that's working in an outsourced setting, you shouldn't plan on, to John's point, making it too transactional an experience. And I think you could probably do that with an engineer that joins your team as a contractor. Just plan on investing in them for the years span rather than the week to month span, because there's going to be so much ramp up and so much mentorship you're going to have to do to give them the context they need to be successful. So that longevity is really, really important. And then the other thing is being able to actually interact with the individual contributors. So I've had folks reach out to me from various outsourcing firms that say, hey, all you have to do is talk to the one PM or product manager or project manager, and you'll tell them what you're looking for and they'll figure it out with the team. And one of the things I really value is being able to interact through one-on-ones and through skip one-on-ones at this point with all of the members of the team that I'm responsible for. They're as close as possible as you can be to the work. And so the feedback that they have and the intuition that they have is critical to us moving in the right direction. And so whether that's in an outsourced setting or with folks working on your team, just plan to invest in the long term with folks and plan to actually interact with the individual contributors so you can be building the right thing with their intuition and their learnings.
I think that's totally right. If you think about it from the end of that relationship, you're like a contracted or outsourced relationship likely has some known end date. So you go into it knowing that they will exit the project and there will be turnover. And I think if you think about just in any of your current jobs today, if you're hiring someone underneath you or a coworker and you were saying to yourself, I'm going to know that this person will churn and leave the company in X time frame, what would you want them to accomplish? And so looking at it like that, you might think that, well, I don't want to outsource maybe the core of my product, but there's a whole bunch of this, I'll say, commodity kind of stuff that I have to do. I need to get maybe a payment processing set up. I maybe need to get a catalog set up somewhere. I maybe need some other things there. That may make a lot of sense to do. But if you were saying I'm going to build a machine learning recommendation engine, it's do you really want the person who builds that to then leave your company 6 months from now? And the answer is likely no.
Chandana, I wanted to I'd love for you to kind of kick off this conversation about actually getting developers on your team. So where do we begin? Where do you look? And for a company that's early, might not have a lot to offer by way of certainty, how do you begin the process of recruiting?
It's really hard. I would say the first
We all know that.
Yeah. I think the first best way is to look inwards towards your network. After working in any industry for so long, especially the tech industry, which is pretty concentrated, you build a pretty large network. And I really think that, relationship-based hires are the most effective hires from a recruiting perspective because they're the easiest to close. And then also, once they actually get their foot in the door, they are really motivated to do a good job. There's a connection there. They're likely to stay a lot longer, so retention rate is a little bit higher. Outside of that, there really isn't a great answer. I think some of the more obvious ways are sourcing on LinkedIn through a lot of hiring platforms, and then trying to get really creative and think about well, if I host meetups and tech talks and go to career fairs, it's not going to yield immediate Q1 hires, but it's a great way to get your name out there and start networking and reap the benefits of more hires in a couple years.
You mentioned easier to close. So what is that process, or what would you say is a good process between the putting a job post up, if you even do that, if you don't hire a friend, for example, to closing someone? What does that look like? What should you be talking to people about as a startup?
I think the best way is to really just try to be as engaging as possible from the beginning, especially when you were talking about engineering talent and hiring engineers. The more specific you can be about the technical challenges that they're going to be working on day one versus month 3, month 6, and then a year is a really good way for people to get an understanding of A, the technical challenges, B, the growth that they're going to see, and then getting the stakeholders involved from the very beginning. So making sure that they're getting FaceTime with some of the founders or the engineering leadership is a great way to do that.
Can we talk a bit about compensation? Let's say, I have a startup, it's 3 people, maybe, or 2 co-founders, 2 additional people, haven't really raised much. What is expected of me to offer?
It really depends. I know that's also
or how can I think through it?
Yeah. So the best way to answer this is really just to say that I think compensation is probably the easiest way to weed out people. Everyone has different motivations and factors for, joining a company or leaving their job. And I think to be, a founding member of a team or one of the first engineers sets you up for success in a way that not a lot of other places can do. And if people are really motivated by that, they're willing to take a pay cut. Mm-hmm. And if they're not and they want to see a crazy high base salary, then it's probably better that they just go to a big company anyways.
Tom, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. You've done quite a bit of hiring.
The key is offering. It doesn't really matter if it's for a person out of college or a senior or a manager. The key is to offer people a chance to grow. And so I think it's a lot about how you position the role. Mm-hmm. And if you're willing to take on people that are super talented and the seniors that you need, but call them something more than they've been before, then that makes it attractive. If you build a position that is exactly what you need a person that's done exactly this and knows this, then I would ask, well, why would you join? Why would they join if they've already done all this? Mm-hmm. And so there has to be something else, something bigger than just what you need to offer them as a growth opportunity. Or you hire just underqualified. You find the qualified bar and you hire just underqualified, kind of optimizing for talent rather than experience just a little bit so that you can compete for the talent you're looking for.
I feel like I know I make a lot of generalizations about why it's hard to hire tech talent, but can we just be specific? Like, why is it? Are there not enough? Do people need more pay than we're offering them? They're risk averse. What's the, they think entrepreneurs are ugly. What are the real issues that you confront when you're out trying to grow your teams?
Good engineers are fairly hard to find, and those are just ultimately very expensive. Even if you read Hacker News, kind of a common site for engineers and technical folks, and even non-technical folks to kind of post technical articles and discuss things, you'll see that there are massive amounts of folks nowadays who are a little disillusioned with startups. Anytime there's an article on equity, people are like, why would you go to a startup when Facebook's going to pay you $450,000 a year? And this is different, especially in the Bay Area. It's even crazier than it is here. And so, I remember when we were maybe about 12 or 15 people, we were hiring out of college. So Bill, my co-founder and our CEO, went to MIT. So we tried to really get do the Dropbox thing. Let's hire a bunch of MIT people because we have the network there. And we made an offer to someone out of school. I think it was $110,000 total. And his Facebook offer was $100,000 base, $100,000 bonus, and $100,000 signing bonus. So this was someone who's like 22 who like, how can you turn down that much money? It's crazy. And, we see this not only that the number is high, but it's been increasing. I remember when we could get a senior engineer for $150,000, then like 180 was the new 150, and then 200 was the new 180, and now 200 doesn't even cut it. We have to do 215, 220 for some, like I'm talking like 10, 15 years experience, but this is very expensive to do. So the thought of like, I'm going to be able to get an engineer and pay them $50,000 or $60,000, I think to your point, like that strategy is what we did, was find someone who was kind of a little underqualified. Like we went for a university hire. They had never had a job before. iOS was also very nascent. I mean, this was 2011. And so, we were like, you can kind of come in and we'll pay you, what was a good wage. Obviously, they were living here in New York City. But if we hire that role today, hiring iOS engineers now is it's more than double what we paid this person.
Chandana, how do you approach compensation at Latch, and what is the resistance that you see in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think just like any other startup, we really try to leverage equity as much as we can. Mm-hmm. I will say that we have gotten a lot more fair with our candidates in terms of base salary to really meet market rate. But again, it just comes down to the fact that software engineers are the hardest people to hire today because they are so in demand. So it's really hard to find them. And then, the really good ones typically aren't looking. So you're actively trying to sell to find these people. And then once you do, they're being pulled left and right by every single other company.
Yeah. So go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I think there's a little intangible just in the sense of empathy. Right? It's the one advantage that you might have as a founder or a leader or whatever it is. If you can offer a sense of empathy for what people are looking to do and it's genuine, like you can't really fake that. People can tell in a minute. And so I think you have to look at yourself and your leadership and think, what can we offer at the human level for people to grow and feel like they enjoy the work and they're part of something that's a little smaller than Facebook, and that's a good thing. And see if you can create some equity for your company just based on that.
I think that's such a good point. And I would love to hear, because I mean, the be a good person, and to the point you made earlier, you offer people a way to grow as they come into your company, but you probably also are saying that you're signaling that they will grow. You're saying things that make so much sense and that I totally believe would be influential in getting someone to say yes. How do you signal that? Like, what are some ways? Do you just take people out to dinner? Is there a way that you write your job posts? Like, how do you get that across?
So I think the way you get it across is in a way that larger companies wouldn't be able to. So you have to show up rather than having them come to you. Mm-hmm. Early on, that meant going to not just the career fair, but like meeting them for dinner afterward. Yeah. It means showing up and saying, hey, this is the demo and this is where I see you fitting into the vision. And it's really painting a picture of what the company's mission is and how they can imagine growing. And the most important part of it is to really listen to them, just to say, like, how do you want to grow? And then either, like, in a perfect world, you'd be able to say, hey, I've had that experience and I can kind of paint the picture for you. But even better is to be able to point to someone else at your company that was on a similar trajectory and you've kind of made good on your promise to them.
Yeah.
And so in as much as you can, you should show rather than tell.
Yeah.
What a lot of recruiters tend to do, and like, in fact, what our team does is when they have a first call with someone, they also want to understand like a lot of kind of background information, like what are you looking for, why are you looking, like what are the things that are factors that are important to you, and that can help kind of set the stage for the sell. It is important to really try hard, not just to understand what they want, but try to read between the tea leaves to make sure they're telling you the truth. Because there's a thing when you ask people what they want, I guarantee you, everyone says, I just want to make an impact. And like, then money is like third. And it's like, then when push comes to shove, money was actually number one, right? It's like, everyone wants to go to the gym. You're like, do you want to work out? And like, yeah, of course. Like, do you want to wake up at 5 a.m. and go with me tomorrow? They're like, no, I don't. And money's like that, right? They say it's not important, but when you're 10% under someone else's offer, you can beat them with a vision and mission and empathy. Like, if we're 200 and Facebook's 225, we should be able to win that. If we're 200, Facebook is 300, we're probably not going to win that, because it's like the quality of life difference for them isn't like you're just going to go out to eat a little more. It's like now you have like a better apartment and like maybe you got a car, and like that's very hard to compete against. So ultimately it's like finding the people who like really mean it. We improved our close rate dramatically by literally just not making offers to people who we thought were statistically or probabilistically were like not going to accept them based on the signaling we got from them of what truly was important to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
I think also like a lot of us are talking about just going head to head with companies the way that the other companies do. But the other thing that you can do is try to play to your strengths in parts of your network that aren't as traditional. So like for us, the two things that we play to are, one, a bunch of the people at the company at this point have academic backgrounds. So we talk to our professor friends. We say, hey, which of your students wants to come work with us for a summer? We're not going to poach them. We're not going to try to hire them full time just yet. And they spend the summer with us. They build a system, they deploy it, they study it, and then we're going to publish a paper with them at a top tier conference. And from there, we can, one, like build our credibility with the rest of the community. And two, when they go to graduate in a year or two, they'll be talking to us about continuing that collaboration. And the other strength that we play to is Kainar, our first engineer. He was the second person in Kyrgyzstan to go to MIT. And so he's basically famous in Kyrgyzstan. And he wanted to move, after working at a startup, he wanted to kind of move back home and like bring startup culture back to Bishkek, the capital. And so we opened up an office there. He's just done an amazing job recruiting. And there are some really, really, really talented engineers in Bishkek. Their prior experiences were in kind of outsourced, very transactional engineering. And so the thing we kind of have to bring to the table in both of those different scenarios is a strong mentorship culture to help either mentor on the Bishkek team things like product thinking and explaining the product process and how to think longer term about the kind of software that you're building. And on the academic side of things, kind of investing in software engineering fundamentals.
It's a really great story. Hiring is hard, supply, demand, et cetera, et cetera. How in the world do you carve out space and priority for diversity? I want to speak specifically to the people who are like there on the early teams.
So, I mean, one thing that I'll say is that you do have to kind of put a lot into it. It's challenging overall when you think about the fact that, like, if you can't hire anyone, how can you be selective? And so you think of like, look, like if people come and want to work for us, like we're going to take them, and you can end up with demographics that are similar, or kind of a monoculture. So if you do nothing, you literally can just fall into it. So you have to actively like push out against it in order to kind of make those things happen. So this is like one of those things where we put a big focus on college hiring when we were early on, because you think about the people talk about like pyramids with things of like if you're trying to hire people who are like 15 years of management experience, it's going to be very hard to get some of those diversity hires, because what does that mean? That means that they had to have started their career and really kind of achieved very highly over the last 15 years, and that is certainly possible to do, but the numbers may not necessarily be there due to the difficulty of adversity that people might have faced. But if you start where people are entering, you should be able to get a much better ratio. Mm-hmm. So that was one thing that we tried to aim on, is saying like, well, at least we can make these numbers a little bit more diverse. Mm-hmm. And then we can see kind of then those people can become our senior engineers and they can become our managers from that. So that was our early strategy, just because it was like, we were 10 people. And so it was like, beggars couldn't always be choosers, but we were like, we can try to make some effort here to improve this.
And my understanding is that it only gets harder if you haven't built that value in from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's like, imagine that like you have a candidate walk in and every person they meet is like, the same looking person and operates the same and acts the same to them. And then, they might not have like that good experience there. And so it will get harder if the person you're trying to hire walks in and they're the only person in the room.
Your Tom.
Yeah, I can kind of break down how to build a both diverse workforce and inclusive culture. But in a small company and you don't have a lot of time, if there's one thing you can do that's not that hard, is just diversify the pipeline. You want to get those resumes diverse. If you don't do that, the rest would be nearly impossible. And so you do that by working with companies that are much better than you at doing that and will always be. And they could be sign up to Fairy Godboss or work with Stotts and May or find an agency that could really prove to you that they can bring in diverse pipeline. And that's already, 30% of the fight because you're getting the resumes that are diverse. And so a lot easier later to also diversify the interview pipeline. If your company is really small and on a particular position, you don't have interviewers that are, female and the candidate is female, find someone in your network to have a half-hour talk that knows you well and can say, oh, I can sort of talk about this person or this company, these values they really care about, this is what they plan to do. And then later on, once you had the breakthrough with a couple hires from minority groups or just in general, the sense of diversity, just keep that interview pipeline diverse, keep your decision making, find a way that doesn't take a lot to build a very small operation around it, right? Decision making. There's a million articles that's way smarter than me online to think how you do decision making in a way that's as much as possible bias free. Just build those small things into your operation. Even early on, you can do it. And then I think this is like a snowball, maybe is kind of what you were saying. As soon as you're in, then one person brings another person walks in the door and sees, oh, they're already pretty diverse even for a small team, and this will just reinforce itself.
Chandana, you're the true professional here. So when it comes to diversity and hiring, what advice can you shed? Bias-free hiring, inclusive management. How do we signal that, that diversity is a priority and actually manifest that?
I would say getting buy-in from leadership is the biggest piece. It doesn't matter how much work I do as a recruiter unless my engineering leaders know that this is a priority. They won't understand the message that I can hire X candidate today that doesn't necessarily meet a diverse profile. But if you give me 30 days or even a quarter, I can build a really diverse pipeline and we can go from there. So I'd probably say that's number one. Diversity is such a challenge, and it was hard when I was at Google and Uber, and of course today at Latch. And my biggest piece of advice is if you really can't hire diverse candidates, hire candidates that care about diversity hiring and that really want to get involved in it and have ideas on programs and initiative. And the more backup you have as an organization as a whole, the more armed you are to really tackle these challenges.
Is there any advice you might have in if I want to attract candidates of color or make sure there are more women in the pipeline? Is there a different way to run the process that might kind of encourage that?
Networking.
Okay.
Huge. Go to events, go to meetups, go to tech talks, go to all of these events and channels that really encourage people from diverse backgrounds to come to. Coding academies and, app academies. I know this is hard for, again, people who are looking for very senior talent, but these are the people that come from these diverse backgrounds that are really driven and are very eager to get a job, which is great.
Yeah.
Change your colleges if you're doing college hiring. Like we would go to MIT's career fair, UPenn's career fair, Stanford's career fair, because that's where we had talent from. And so we had some network, so that was good. But, there's, again, going to be similar kind of candidate challenges there. So if you go and expand that, then we started looking at, okay, well, what if we go to Toro College here in New York City? What if we go to, just down the street somewhere, and it just kind of change that up and you'll get a different pool.
Yeah, it always surprises me. People, why not historically Black universities, or there are these, if we add these tweaks to our processes, like you said, go down the street to a local university. There can be real opportunity there for meeting great, amazing people that aren't necessarily your co-alums, your fellow alums. Yes.
I think I agree that the hardest part is to get the buy-in. And so here's the 30-second pitch that you can take to your co-founder and convince them. It's just that diverse teams build products that appeal to wider audiences. If your TAM's larger, you're going to sell more, you're going to make more money. And so if the human value is not enough, and it should be, then you can directly show, and there's enough research to show that diverse teams just help companies make more money.
And I actually hesitate to ask that question sometimes. Like we've moderated a few panels like this, like, okay, well, why do we do it? I mean, and regardless of what the answer is in terms of justification, I think that most of the people that appear on our panels that I know I speak to, like, deeply feel it's important, and sometimes for reasons that they can't even justify. And I guess I think that's important because that's how deeply you probably have to feel it in order to make this like a realistic and productive value on your team.
It's not like there's like one thing you do across the company to like solve the diversity problem. So for us, it's very contextual. In New York, more than half of the product team, more than half of the product leadership, and more than half of the engineers on our team are women. But there's other forms of underrepresented minorities. There's very few people that have families, for example. And so what's the problem that we have here? Like one of the issues is when we send out coding exercises for the beginning of our interview, we initially said, hey, just send it back to us by the end of the week. And what that optimizes for is someone who has all the free time in the world to work on the thing for as long as possible. And lo and behold, that's people that don't have families and have as much free time as they want, or they're not the primary caregiver or something like that. Yeah. And so that was a really easy thing to change. We just said, hey, let us know when you're going to work on it. We're going to expect it back from you in X hours. In Bishkek, we had a very different problem, which is that the entirety of the early team was men. And there's a structural issue where women seem to exit the workforce somewhere in the middle, in like their mid-20s. And so we kind of just had to create our own pipeline. And so we explicitly created an internship program for underrepresented minorities in Bishkek. Mm-hmm. And so I think you probably also have to look at like the specific area that you're in and the specific problem that you're facing and address it case by case.
Yeah, that's a great point. In skipping into the kind of management side of things, managing early employees on a tech team, would love to hear about goal setting. And actually, I know, Chandana, even though your experience is later stage, can we start with you and kind of, as you kind of bring people into a team, can you tell us about maybe some positive or negative examples of how you've seen them onboarded or kind of practices in the early stages that really, management practices that kind of set them on a good or bad path?
The best examples I've seen are managers that take time out of their busy day to actually get to know their employee. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean just like onboard them or give them the tools, but really take the time to develop a relationship with them. And I think it essentially comes down to this likability factor, that your relationship with your employees, no matter how technically or smart, it's always going to be tough if you're not, likable, whatever that means. So I think just really taking that time to like truly build a relationship with them, hour-long one-on-ones, even though it takes away time from a million other things you have to do, is the best way to manage people.
Isn't like there's some stat like 75% of your happiness and satisfaction in a job is based on your supervisor.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I was not purposely exaggerating either. I think that's like close to the number. What about like goals and management in those early stages? Again, kind of hearkening back to that, everything's fluid and crazy. Oh, I think let's get a mic down this way too. How do you set goals and get the product off the ground? Nobody knows. Nobody.
Yeah, you don't know. I just want to kind of piggyback on this answer for a second, which is that when people ask me like some of the advice I have for like early stage founders and younger founders, what I say to them that I wish I did is I would absolutely have hired someone who like would manage our people or HR function in the first 10 hires of the company. We waited very long before we actually hired someone deliberately into that function. We tried to kind of fill it with programs that I would run or programs that someone else would run. But the thing is that ultimately what all employees want is they want to ensure that they have a good manager who's undergone manager training. They want to know that they have a career path. They want to know that they're being compensated fairly and that you kind of know how you're going to grow and then how they're going to achieve those things. They want to make sure they can give feedback to the company and that the action is going to be taking place from that. All of those programs are HR and people related programs. And if you're not actively putting time, someone isn't actually responsible for and actively putting time towards those, you don't slip through the cracks when you're the co-founder and you're doing it on like 10% of your time. It essentially goes to zero. So I think it's a really great point and very important. In terms of goal setting, I mean, the first thing you got to do is just find product market fit. Like that is number one goal of any young startup is just, are we going to have a business here and are people going to want to buy it? Or we're going to run out of money and kind of not be able to do anything. So that is essentially the thing number one we had to do. So for us, what we said when we were a young company was we're going to take two paths. One is we're going to try to build a product, and the second is we're going to try to sell it like all at the same time. And this was like really kind of crazy in the sense that what I mean crazy is we just went out and tried to talk to everyone we could to make sure that we were going to get the right product market fit. I mean, we didn't have a product yet, and we were trying to talk to like big national companies that either had some kind of experimental budget or something.
Is this what your engineering team did?
Oh, sorry. I was just talking about kind of like the co-founding side of it. But engineering, you want product market fit. So you're essentially trying to make sure you have strong product leadership of what you should build, which you likely are getting from a mix of talking to customers or the ideation and vision you have yourself, and then making sure that the engineering team is executing on that in a focused way, because you're going to run out of runway at some point. Probably very soon. And so the goals are just is this viable? And how do I answer that as fast as we can?
Yeah. Yeah, Tom.
So I think if you're asking more about personal goals with each person so that you can later evaluate performance, is that what the question was about?
How, you have 5 employees, let's say, you have 2, what are some management practices when you frankly don't have structure, that you're probably going to have, 10 or 15 people down the line?
Yeah, I put that structure in place really, really early on. I had an idea for a startup a few years ago, and we were 2 people, and I already had a development workflow. You could do these things early. The fact that you're young doesn't mean you have to be messy, and I think with goals it's the same.
Yeah.
Take a little sort of thin framework. If you're following a similar thing to what I do, with kind of like the alignment and understanding the business goal and the delivery that you need from the engineers, you can take some of those goals. If it's someone earlier in their career and they're just starting, define the deliverables that would become the goals. More simply, as a deliverable, it's good enough. It doesn't have to be a sophisticated KPI. And make it small enough so that the chance for success is high. And as they get better and more advanced in their career and with your company, you can get a little more ambitious there. But have some deliverable that you can define and that they can work towards. And then as we talked about matching positions to people's needs and their interest and growth, you can define some that are more personal goals. And it could be something like exposure to a certain technology that they're interested in that you can carve a niche for them at the moment.
Yeah.
Or it could be something more generic, like someone is interested in learning how to do Agile really well, or somebody is interested in, figuring out the pre-sale role that an engineer might take on. Find a way for them to define a certain personal goal. And what this will do is both it'll help you evaluate how they're doing, but it'll also help you show them, hey, look, we defined those goals for the quarter and you're hitting them. Hey, look at this year. You wanted to do these 8 things and we got you to do all of them. You can really work on the retention just as much as you're working on optimizing performance.
Chandana, in the early days, what are some kind of review structures that, even small teams can put into place? And even if there are tools you recommend, what's the cadence of feedback?
Feedback is so important. And I think even more importantly than that is documenting feedback and relaying feedback on a consistent basis. So I think implementing tools and processes from day one that, let people know you will consistently get feedback, whether it's good or bad. You should give me consistent feedback, whether it's good or bad, really houses a good environment where people feel very comfortable being honest. And I think that's the most important part, because I just don't think people necessarily feel comfortable being honest all the time when giving feedback.
So should people write it? Should it be, it's hard to make it anonymous, certainly, but I'm terrified to get feedback on myself. but I know it's the right thing to do. How can I create an environment where people are comfortable giving me feedback?
I think it probably starts with you. I think, just by being comfortable getting it, it's the only way any of us are going to grow is if we take that constructively and really take it to heart and implement change from there. And I think, when people see you taking it so well, it probably inspires something in them to actually step up to the plate and do it well themselves too.
I've heard tools like 15.5, and are there any tools that have worked really well for your teams to help you manage this feedback and review?
I feel like there's kind of like different points for giving feedback, and to Yotam's point, like they're all free to implement on day 0, and so the way I think of it is like at the like micro interaction level or like deliverable level, at the team level, and then at the like individual like career mentorship level. Like for an individual engineer, day 0 of the company, if you wrote code and submitted a pull request, it got a code review.
Yeah.
And so there's not a single line of code that doesn't have another person, usually a tech lead or a tech lead manager, that's looking at your code and actively giving your feedback on how you can improve it or think about the next person along the way. And so that's like every single day getting feedback in hopefully a very unemotional way. At the team level, like we plan in 6-week cycles, and it's reasonable at the end of every cycle to say, hey, did we hit our goals? And if we didn't hit our goals, the first place I usually look is like the leadership of the team. Did the product manager like just ask for something that was way too big in scope? If so, great, like let's iterate with the product manager to help them like downscope things in the future. Did the tech lead work with the individual contributing engineer to break it down into bite-sized chunks so that they could feel like they're making progress every single day? And if they didn't, then work with them. And it's almost always one of those two things, and not like some person being lazy and not showing up and giving it a shot.
Yeah.
And then for the last part, like I think it's really important on like, in week 1 or day 1 of the company to establish recurring one-on-ones with everyone there. And if it's not you, it's like the person's manager should be doing it. At least for me, the way I think about one-on-ones is it's mostly time for the mentee to be speaking and giving feedback and asking questions along the way. And so if I don't bring up a topic at all during our one-on-one, that's okay. Usually at least every other one-on-one, I'll have some piece of feedback to give someone, and I'll make sure that I have, 5, 10, 15 minutes to do that. But in setting up that regular space every week, every 2 weeks to give feedback, but even more so to get feedback and ask questions like, what mistakes are we making? Hopefully you start getting more of it.
I want to get one last question in, and give me brief answers if possible. Think about the best manager, best tech manager maybe it's you. What's the one thing that they do that makes them a great manager? Can we start with you, Adam?
They listen.
Okay.
Sorry. Oh, that's good. They build connections inside the organization outside of the team so that they can best serve every single function.
Probably say people genuinely love working with them.
They deliver on time and with quality. I mean, the people stuff's really important too, but like ultimately, like you look at, with the people thing, you can look one level deep too. Is like, are they like essentially growing their team below them at like an average or higher rate, right? If they manage a bunch of junior level engineers, how long does it take those junior engineers to come mids? And is that like within the realm of expectations? And is that manager helping them grow? But ultimately, you want to make sure that people are getting stuff done.
Great. Let's see what the questions are. So, first question, 6 people are asking, is it true that people management is not as compelling for engineering talent? How do I find engineers that actually want to lead and mentor their teams? Chandana, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because I think you're the first one who mentioned how important management is and the senior talent on the team.
I would say that's true from my perspective. A lot of the senior engineers I talk to that have been managers or are moving out of management went into engineering because they just love coding so much. Mm-hmm. And as you progress as an engineer, I think a lot of engineers think, well, management is just the next logical step when there's another entirely different track that they could climb up. And they go into it and they realize very quickly it's not for them. And maybe that's why they backtrack. So I would say there is truth to that.
For the non-technical among us, myself included, can you tell me the terms that mean, like if you are are there any terms that indicate someone is more of a manager on a technical team than an engineer, or are they CTO or VP of engineering? Are there any terms we can look for in their background to show management?
I mean, we have engineering manager, senior engineering manager, engineering director, VP of engineering, SVP of engineering. Essentially, it's going to be those level titles. For the way that we title individual contributors is going to be like software engineer, and then a level 1, level 2, senior engineer, senior staff engineer, principal engineer. So those are going to be the kind of keywords that we're going to use for what they're.
Can someone who calls themselves a product person or who has managed product teams, are they viable engineering managers, or is that different?
It kind of depends. I think that it's going to look into like what types of things have they done. I mean, ultimately for engineering managers, you need to manage a team of engineers to execute on some kind of deliverable and get things done there. So if you have the track record of being able to do that because you're a product manager and you like helped bring a product to fruition, like maybe you're going to be able to succeed there. But a big part of this that some of the folks are talking about is that you want to have technical mentorship. Like engineers want to grow, and so they want their manager to be able to help them do that. Oftentimes, I've seen a lot of engineers some cohorts of age that also would like want their manager to be able to do their job, and they like want to respect their manager for being able to be a better engineer than they are, even though that may not always be the best trait of a manager. Yeah. So it's quite possible, but for me it'd be like delivery and technical ability are certainly there.
Chandana, what do you look for when you're prioritizing someone who's going to be a good manager on the technical side?
Well, for me, selfishly, it's engineering leaders that know how to grow teams. I think that's a big part of it as an engineering manager. I think really knowing how to work with recruiting and grow teams, be really invested in recruiting is huge. But other than that, I think just looking for leaders that have a lot of empathy and that understand people is there as well.
Right. For the people in the audience who are going to go the outsourcing route in the early days, what's your advice on working with an outsourcing partner, Yotam or Adam?
I think if you're going that route, there's two things. One is scope things in detail, more in detail that you do these days with everyone doing agile and doing one sentence tickets. And the other thing is check back more often. You'll save more time as things, go aside and put them back on track.
Any advice on what to look for as you're bringing on a team or interviewing teams? What are good indicators, that you look for?
Well, we're still in the outsourcing question?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't speak directly to outsourcing as much as I can to HR partners. I have remote teams. I've had one in Canada the past few years. I have one in Argentina now. I think what you're looking for is what kind of support their ecosystem brings in. Can they enable your culture and help you set it and help people feel like they belong to your team just the same? Some of them build their own internal culture. There's good and bad in that. Sort of create a sense of belonging within their company. It might bring some good infrastructure that would make them more efficient. It might make their sense of belonging a little bit harder to create. But look into what the HR partner brings. What is their ecosystem? What is their belief? How do they build their business? And see if it fits.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, you probably have to have a hypothesis on how long. I think someone mentioned this earlier on the panel, how long you're going to use them. Is this someone you're going to be interested in bringing on long term? How long? I know when we built out an early version of Stacklist, when it was more of a tool reference site, we were pretty deliberate. We kind of knew exactly what we wanted that team not to deliver because I wasn't technical, but we knew exactly the support we needed to kind of get this first product off the ground. And so I'm by no means an expert, but I know that there was kind of a checklist of things that we were considering less in their skill set, which someone else approved, but more in like their work structure. Were they with us 4 hours a day or 8 hours a day? Things like that were helpful to think through. Next question. How much equity should I give a software engineer if the company is brand new for them? If my company is brand new, so to invest in kind of a long-term software engineer, I'm going to turn this into a two-part question. If you don't have a technical co-founder and you find one, what kind of equity split are we talking about? Are we talking about more than half to kind of match what they would get in the market, or less? How would you think about that? And also for your early software engineers, how do you think about equity?
I think you're looking to give as much as you can, really. And when it comes to the founders, equality is better than trying to say, I bring this to the table, I should get 5% more, or you should get, that stuff goes bad. And so try to keep it equal within the same level. And then you're not trying to give the least you can. You're trying to give as much as you can. That still makes sense to make it attractive.
But the counterpoint being, John was just grazing over the statistics earlier, just like what the technical co-founder could get on the like the opportunity cost is probably vastly different. So, but equality is better, and that's quite possibly the main point here. In spite of that, you're saying there should be balance and equality.
That's how I think about it. But
yeah.
I like speaking as a technical co-founder. I wouldn't want to enter in a relationship with another founder that wasn't a relationship of equals. Mm-hmm. So I think if you're setting things up as like technology is somehow more important than other aspects of the company, you're probably setting up a very strange dynamic. And then the flip side, you should expect equality if you're being brought on as the technical co-founder or something like that.
Yeah. And what about those early hires? How much equity is there math, or how do I kind of think through what to offer? How did you do it?
I mean, so there's a couple different schools and practices that people tend to do. They say stuff like employees should always own X% and kind of at each like additional round of funding or whatnot. But kind of I think this question changes as you raise money. Because money kind of comes into the situation of like the startup becoming more de-risked or just the cap table just changing. But basically it's like, if you're coming on even as a technical co-founder, if you're coming on and there's like no customers and no money and no product and no anything, then yeah, I mean, why would you like settle for anything less than, that would be like your fair share or what you would feel is comfortable with. But if you're coming into something that has been going for a year, as a bunch of customers, like kind of has something and really needs to take it to the next level, is like going to probably raise funding, or is like, talking to VCs and may be raising funding soon, like you probably shouldn't expect to get, an equal share with the other person there. But then generally the way that we did it, because we're venture backed, is that we have an options pool that is essentially carved out from each of the rounds of funding. So then we have a fixed amount that we're going to offer to folks up until basically we would assume our next round of funding, unless we exhaust it. You can always exhaust your options pool and then grant more equity. But basically, like, the thing is that you need to think about how many hires you're going to have and then fill it out. So if you have a 5% equity pool and you think that, like, we look at it as like, okay, well, we're going to hire 20 people with this before we need to get to it. Well, we should exhaust that pool by the time we get there, and then think on like kind of what that decay function is going to essentially look like from person taking the most risk.
Thank you. Chandana, can you kind of maybe give an overview of what vesting options might work better or worse for certain teams, or how to kind of structure the equity that you do give out?
Yeah, it's tough. It really varies. I think, again, my best answer would be to just always try to go higher on equity as much as you can. Equity incentivizes people to stay. And that's the way I always push back to my leaders when trying to fight for candidates to get them, more equity or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. That the higher we go, the longer this person's going to be around.
Is hiring a dedicated Scrum Master in an early stage startup worthwhile? Can the early team efficiently follow Agile principles through mutual understanding? Adam, or no, Tom? Yeah.
That's a no for me. I think your team can run Agile perfectly. There's all the resources and the expertise. And I think it's usually the product managers that have the right skill set and the natural tendencies to run a Scrum team well. And so I wouldn't spend on that.
And to build on that, I think it's like the process matters a ton, but the thing that you're really looking for in someone who's very early on in your company and establishing a product function in it is them giving you clarity of what you need to do next to run the next experiment. And so whether that's through Scrum or something else, like they should be the one that's offering you both stability and the shortest path to figuring out the answer to the question that you have, and then moving on to the next question/answer set.
Thank you. What are your reasons behind hiring distributed teams rather than local hiring? I know you have a distributed team. That's not how it started. Who has kind of, please jump in.
Yeah.
Rationale for either case.
Yeah. So we're like whatever, 40% New York and Bishkek. And then there's a few other team members in different parts of the world. For us, I'd say we backed into it just by way of who the early team was in our network, and like working around that. So just making sure that we could say yes to the people that we really wanted to work with. The fact that we ended up having some really key members of the team working in drastically different time zones meant that we became very remote friendly. And that's not about technology. It's not even about process. It's about like communicating really well and like largely in written form. And as soon as you have that, then it doesn't really hurt to add someone else in another city as long as you're not blowing up your time zones even more. And so just think about communication early on, whether you're willing to make the very heavy investment in just more clear written communication. And if you're willing to, then you can hire smart people wherever they are.
Yeah. Did you have this experience, John?
So we're actually 100% focused in New York City for our product and engineering team.
Okay.
Our company, we have 5 offices globally, but all of product and engineering is here. But we're changing that this year. Essentially, when we kind of rewind back to the beginning, we wanted to we were working with mobile folks, so we're trying to do a lot of collaboration and kind of talking. So in person was very important for us, and then building the community, like a kind of a tight bond within ourselves, was very important for us. It's also a principle why we give employees like free lunch every single day, and we have lunch tables. We discourage people from like eating at their desks because we want that kind of community and that kind of structure there. So as we had hired more engineers, we felt that there was a good productivity gain from everyone being together and like ideating and being able to have good relationships in person. But it gets a little challenging because you're limiting your talent pool, especially if you're in like New York or San Francisco. It may cost you a lot more money to hire these kinds of folks. Yeah. You don't have time zone coverage. So if you have to do overnight 24/7 like support, someone's going to get paged and woken up. And so there are a lot of downsides there. So we want to actually make sure that we can flex the muscle of having engineering teams that are not centered in New York City. I think one of the other challenges that we faced that made it harder for us to do it before now was we want to make sure that we set up people up for success and delineate kind of what the responsibilities are. So if we just put a person, or at least my thought is if we just put a person like on an island and they're like maybe on a team, but they can't attend any of their like meetings because the time zones are different, it's not going to be great. We want someone to be able to like run at full force 40 hours plus a week, being able to build and know what they're doing. So we think about it from a team-based perspective. So the first hire that we're actually going to hire, not in New York City, is not an individual contributor, it's a manager. So we want the manager there to then hire a team around it and give them a complete distinct set of functionality and features that they can be building on and kind of working on their roadmap separately or in conjunction with us, but not being reliant on us.
What would you say is a good starting point for companies looking to incorporate diversity and inclusion initiatives, D&I initiatives, into their hiring processes in 2020? Chandana, I'd love to go back to you on this. And also, I'd like to expand that question. Just say, what is a goal I can set as a manager around D&I? So, or what could the framework for a goal be?
I think, the goals can vary a lot. I think a lot of companies will take the route of I need to make X diverse hires by this date. And I think if you change that mentality to say, I'm going to attend, this many events by this date, or, I'm going to host this many meetups for this type of a community, I think that's probably a better way to look at it, a little more tangible too. Mm-hmm. And then going back to the original question, it was, what's a way to actually implement that?
A starting point
for
D&I initiatives in hiring.
in hiring. Yeah, again, I would say that very first starting point is getting the support of your leaders. That's probably the best way that you can tackle any of those challenges, is really having that support and that buy-in from the people at the top that show that they actually do really value it and they're willing to invest the time and the money to make it happen.
I conjecture that a lot of the people in this audience are the leaders who probably are giving the buy-in. So, I think, Tom, do you have a thought on this, that, what could they do to get off the ground in the right way?
Yes, I think diversity, I talked about these three things: diversify the pipeline, interview roster, and the decision making, make it unbiased. And then the inclusion side, I think the key is to operationalize it. You can't just have the values. It's not like something you put in a deck. It's not a single training you can do for your organization, but rather understand what problems people are facing when they feel not included and have an operation for that. And so one example could be interruptions in meetings, right? We know women are a lot more likely to be interrupted. And so if you recognize a problem like this, think about an operationalized solution. It could be a champion in every meeting that pays attention and say, oh, hold on a minute, she was talking. Or put something on the wall, or find a way to review that in retros or whatever it is. Figure out what the top issues are for inclusion that you want to tackle, and just bake it into your process and into your interactions, and not just put a value on the wall.
Second thing I'm going to share is our Stack Summit about 6 months ago on building the team, and we did address some of these topics across a full day, so that could be helpful. Thank you, Chandana. Adam, can teams with better leaders do more with junior engineers?
Yeah, so very specifically, if you employ the strategy of just hiring smart people as quickly as possible, you're going to end up with people who are asking themselves, hey, why aren't I at Facebook or something like that earning a lot more? And the answer is going to be because you're going to grow a lot here. And what does growth mean? It means mentorship in a bunch of different forms. And it means that there's someone there that can unblock you once you're blocked. Mm-hmm. And so I just can't imagine growing a product organization or an engineering organization without every single person there knowing who they're supposed to meet with every single week to have their one-on-one, and who they're supposed to meet with every single day to just talk about the issues that they're running into. That's going to work with them side by side to get them unblocked.
John, I'm part of a small team looking to hire new developers. How do I structure the development team to be agile from the very beginning?
Well, I think one thing in that is to think about your products. So I think that a mistake that we made is that we had everyone who was kind of like a generalist. And if you look at the evolution of what happened on our team, we're like, everyone was working on anything. You could do literally any part of our product. And then we would find that people kind of bifurcated into technology set. So there were some people who were like really good at the front end, and then people who were like, oh, I really like the back end stuff, and like I'm going to specialize there. And then we had like a front end team, and then like a back end team. And then it was just kind of challenging that when we had to do projects, we would need to like have X front end resources and Y back end resources. And we played this like giant Sudoku mapping of like, how do we get enough resources in order to like staff a project? We also had like product managers that were generalists. So like any product manager could run any project. And what helped us, and what I would do from the beginning with a smaller team, is really delineate the teams and the products that you have, and have teams that are kind of like around that have their own roadmaps. So even though you're small, you can sort of think about like, you're not like a front end person, but it's like you run this, product of what we have here. And I think that if you do that, you can have then each of those folks kind of managing their own boards kind of in an agile manner, creating their own cards, prioritizing their own things, running retros in sprint planning on that product itself versus globally prioritizing, which is going to ultimately like end up being challenging down the road.
Good, Tom. Any thoughts on this?
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, I'm part of a small team looking to hire new developers. How do I structure the development team to be agile from the beginning?
Yeah, I think it just needs to be independent. And so if you figure out what the goal and the mission is for that team, it just needs to be able to be staffed so that it can run on its own and not be dependent on anything. And so often to me, at Structured Web, I had 2 people and grew that into about 12 or 15, still small. The key was full stack engineers. Everyone is a full stack engineer. Everyone can take something, build a database model, build a bunch of backend services and the front end, the whole thing on their own. Mm-hmm. Other times where you have, I think, a little more flexibility or your subject matter becomes more complex and you need someone with more expertise. Then even if the team is very small and it's just one backend, one front end, one something else, just make sure that the team is independent. Whatever it is that you set as a goal can be achieved with that team and no other dependencies.
John, Chandana, Yotam, Adam, thank you for being with us, and thank you so much for sharing all your insights.